playfulness and curiosity.
This new superpower called persuasion.
They're the rules of the world, and then here's the rules for us.
What does rich mean?
Stories and wisdom.
Welcome to the Stories and Wisdom podcast. Today we are joined by Renee Smith, founder and CEO of A Human Workplace. Leaders create cultures rooted in love, not fear. In design thinking and system leadership, Renee, you also helped transform, lead, and belong at work. Hey.
It's so good to see you, Pradeep. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, and for people who are just getting to know your work, can you describe a bit more about what is it that you do in your own words, and then how do you actually, what do you really mean when you say bringing love into the workplace?
Oh, we're going to start with a love question. Sure. So my work is, and we'll get into the origin of it in a bit perhaps, but I do research, write, speak, and teach on increasing love in the workplace and decreasing fear in the workplace to make work more human and effective and positive for people and successful for organizations. That's the crux of it. By love, I have embraced the definition that my friend Moshe Engelberg, who wrote the book The Amare Wave, a definition that he offered me one day when he said, Renee, you're making this too complicated. And I said, well, I think it is kind of complicated. The Greeks have 9 definitions of love, and the Hindus have 5 interconnected concepts of love. And there's there's a lot to love. And he said, well, yeah, but love, it boils down to this. He said, love is the energy that uplifts and connects. And I thought, oh, I like that. That makes sense. That is good truth, elegant and simple and universally applicable. And so I've really embraced that and delved into what that looks like across the spectrum of life and our life experiences. And in particular, then, what does the energy that uplifts and connects look like? And how do we need that in our workplaces? So that's the work I do. And I do this set of activities and bring this forward through A Human Workplace and then through the Center for a Loving Workplace, which is the nonprofit that we launched a couple years ago.
When you use language like that, and this is such an odd thing because the examples you're talking about, in the Hindu society, and then, but then in the Western world, to start saying love at the workplace, it's almost like church and government should not come together kind of examples. Do you face that kind of resistance when you're actually taking into the workplace, because you are bringing something in that normally people would say no, that's afterwards, or that's in the weekend, or that's in the later day. But then the way you're approaching it is from connect. It does make sense. So do you see that kind of resistance for this language into the corporate setting? And can you talk us through that?
Sure. On its face, definitely. When I drop the L word in the middle of a keynote talk or a, boardroom or a conversation, or, when I bring that word forward and that concept forward, the initial reaction is sort of a head pivot of, what? Did she just say that? And can we really say that here? And am I going to get in trouble with HR? Wait a minute, is that appropriate? Which is a fair question. And I help people to get clear, first of all, about what fear is and how fear plays out in our lives and in our work, in our brains and our bodies, and what fear does to us. And most people are actually pretty clear about that, having experienced fear in their work and lives. And most people are pretty clear about how damaging it is and how not helpful fear is. And yet it's normalized, in a lot of leadership practices and organizational practices. But we get clear about the damage and the unhelpfulness of fear, and then turn to what is the opposite of fear. This is the question that I grappled with if we're going to decrease fear. And that kind of gets to the origin story, actually, that I would share. That I had a leader one day that I asked him, I asked Chris Liu, so Chris, what do you think is the most important job of a leader? And we were doing all kinds of culture and organizational work together in government. And he immediately shot back to me, to eliminate fear from the workplace. That is the most important job of a leader. And I love that answer. Made sense. I thought, yeah, that Chris is right. When fear is low, good things happen. People contribute and are engaged, and we serve customers well. But when fear is high, morale goes down and we struggle. So that made complete sense. And it only seemed like half the story. And so as I leaned into decreasing fear, I had to grapple with what takes fear's place And essentially, what is the opposite of fear? And came to the conclusion that it's love. And the first time I said that out loud, as you're asking me about, I said that out loud in a very public place in a government lean conference, if you can imagine, continuous improvement lean conference. And there was silence in the room. But then I said, we love our work. We love the people we serve. We love the people we work with. And we want to know that we belong and we matter and that our contributions count. And when we have this sense of being essentially loved, uplifted, and connected, we can give and do and be our very best. And, there was spontaneous applause in the room that day. And for weeks later, people were approaching me and saying, I was there when you said that. Like, keep saying that. We need more of that. And I thought, okay, well, wait a minute. I'm onto something here that I need to understand better. And that's when I'm trained as a social scientist. And so I decided to design a research project and began to conduct research, interviewing people on their experiences of being afraid at work and feeling loved at work and analyzing those stories. I've interviewed 90 people in formal interviews and have workshopped this and like engaged people in conversations, thousands of people and hundreds of events in 11 countries, and have seen the patterns that come forward about how the kinds of fear stories that people tell and how damaging those fear experiences are, and then the patterns to love and how beneficial love is. And so when I take people through first understanding fear and agreeing on the harm and damage, and then introducing love, introducing it as the energy that uplifts and connects. And then, essentially, I encourage listeners to think about when I say the word love, who comes to mind? And maybe I'll ask you this, Pradeep. When I say love, are there particular people that come to mind for you?
Yes, my mom,
Yeah.
then my kids, for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah. So there's our closest people, right? Our family of choice, maybe our closest friends, perhaps. And that's like where our brains go first, and that's natural. And we know what the energy that uplifts and connects looks like in those relationships. So if we were to go to the other end of the spectrum, if we were to think about, the relationships that we have and along an intimacy spectrum, if you will, from those most intimate of relationships to the least intimate, strangers on the street. Recently, my mom had knee surgery, and a couple days after having knee surgery, she went to the bank, and she was walking into the bank and she tripped and fell on the sidewalk. And somebody stopped and helped her collect her things that dumped all over and helped her sit up and made sure she was okay and sat with her until she was ready to get up and walk in. And she went into the bank and then went home, thank goodness, and she was fine. But that stranger helped her that day and exhibited love, the energy that uplifts connects, to my mom, who was a perfect stranger. They'll never see each other again. She doesn't know what her name was, but there was love there for that few minutes. So if we can have love with a perfect stranger, and actually we need to have all kinds of interactions like that. Our society needs more and more interactions like that, where we're uplifting and connecting perfect strangers in all kinds of different ways. And then with our closest people, there's all the other relationships in our lives, right? All the other interactions that we have with other humans on this planet, with our neighbors, with people at the store, with people at the gym, or if we go to a place of worship, or clubs that we are part of, whatever, all the different spaces of our lives in our community, we need energy that uplifts and connects, that is expressed in ways that are appropriate in those venues. And then there's work, where we spend most of our time, right? And we have relationships. And yes, in work too, we need the energy that uplifts and connects in those spaces too, with the people that we work with our leaders, with our suppliers, our vendors, with our customers. All of our relationships in our lives need that love, that energy that uplifts and connects across all the full spectrum. And I believe that that's why we're here. That's our purpose on this planet, is to bring that uplifting connection everywhere we go. And it just so happens that we do a lot of other things along the way, but really that's why we're here.
That's awesome. I mean, it is a very uplifting story, and you had all these multiple vignettes to it. And I'm going to take us into our next segment. The first segment is called Memoir Moment. And I know you've already shared your origin story or part of it, but in this segment, usually we talk to our guests in terms of their formative experiences that often mark the beginning of a journey. So looking back for you, is there a personal, professional story that shifted your understanding of what people needed at work? I know you shared the story of a couple of vignettes with your manager or leader at the specific time, but it could be that, it could be even when you're going back, because you have to be receptive to that answer in a certain way, or something that happened in the past where you were like, I want the opposite of what I'm feeling here, and your journey starts there. So is there a memoir moment that you want to share that shifted your understanding for what people need at work that you're bringing forth now?
Yeah, it's interesting to look at the threads. I just turned 60 this month. And so, I'm kind of at a great moment of looking back and thinking about, the last decades. And when I was a young woman, fell in love with my high school sweetheart, dropped out of college and followed him to Alaska. We got married and had a couple kids and, kind of abandoned my dreams. But we were, living and following his dreams, living first in the Aleutian Islands of Alaska. And then we lived in Homer, Alaska, which was really a beautiful place. And while we were there, he had a small plane and was flying his plane, one day in the fall. It's been like 33 years ago. So he was off flying his plane. There was a knock at the door. I look out the window and there's a police car in the driveway and go to the door. There's a policeman at the door who says, asks if I'm my husband's wife and said there's been an accident and he crashed his plane and you need to go right now. They're taking him to the hospital. And essentially, they didn't know if he would survive. He had a traumatic brain injury and was never the same. That night when that happened, and I was in the hospital with him, and then, trying to grasp what was going to happen next, when everything sort of went from living color to black and white in that time, um, I felt like, okay, this is my challenge. This is the moment when my love is tested, when my promises are, to be kept, and I had to kind of grapple with how am I going to love now, right? And so, I leaned in heavily to love now looks like being true to those commitments and taking care of my husband and my family. And I stayed with him for 8 years. We had 4 children. We had 2 when he was hurt and then had 2 more and just tried to keep those promises and continue living life. And then after 8 years, it became clear one day, it's sort of like the lights went on and I realized, oh, there's harm being done here. Everyone's head injury is different and would just say that my experience of him was that sort of all the good kind of went away and I was left with a lot of negative and over time just really came to grips with how damaging his interactions with the children were and how damaging it was to me. And I just realized I just finally felt released essentially to step away and to reclaim my life again. And so, that initial, when there was the accident and that initial holding on and keeping committed to that love until feeling released from that and needing to discover how to love my own life again and to protect and love my children in a new and different way. So I entered that next phase, and that involved going back to school and rediscovering things about my life and finding my own path again. And then eventually that led to, so had to put love at the center for him and then love at the center for me and the kids. And then eventually understanding, oh, this life is really about putting love at the center of everything. So there's been this thread that's run through, but that profound challenge when everything kind of comes crashing down, literally, and we're faced with who am I going to be now? What am I going to do now? And how am I going to love now? What does that look like now? That's been a catalyzing question all the way along. And it's morphed over time. And I think one of the things that's helped me to really grasp and help people to grapple with is what does love look like in action? Because it's not simple, it's not fluff, it's not light. Each of the moments that I'm describing were big, profound moments of, oh, how does love manifest in this situation? And how do I balance needs? And that is not dissimilar to the kinds of conversations that I have with leaders who are grappling with, I have an employee who has this going on, and we have a team that has this needs, and I have customers with these expectations, and so on, and how we weigh and hold the complexity of that and the sort of the breadth and depth and height of all of that. I like to think of it as leaders, the higher up, if you will, in an organization we go, the greater our capacity to hold all of that complexity has to be, to hold all of that love has to be. And so when you ask about sort of the origins and where the roots, where that goes back to, that really awful experience, that traumatic, life altering experience did provide the seeds for the work I do today.
Thank you for sharing such a deep personal story with us. But at the same time, before we started this segment, like, there was the uplifting example which you're talking about, but then the core essence of where that came from is something of pain, rediscovery, and commitment. And that whole journey, which I don't think was linear. It's linear when you're telling the story backwards, but it was definitely a lot of questions, explorations, discovery, negotiations, and then bringing along, because it was not just an individual journey.
Yeah. You're touching on something that I think is important. It is this idea of uplift doesn't always feel good. Love and uplift has boundaries to it. Sometimes it has no, sometimes uplift is a no, because it's like a longer term uplift. It has a longer line of sight or a longer horizon, right? Sometimes the thing that is needed most is pushback or difficult guidance or feedback or whatever form that might not feel uplifting. Like it's not always that, again, light fluff. Uplift can be the hard truth of something. And that can be the most uplifting, caring thing that we can do for someone sometimes.
It's true. I mean, even engineering agrees with you. Like the aerodynamics, for an uplift to happen, you need forces the opposite direction and your ongoing force in the forward motion for an uplift to happen. So yes, absolutely agree with what you're saying. Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is called Decision Do-Over. Is there a decision in your journey, in your leadership journey or entrepreneurial journey, that you'd want to highlight, that you think you'd want a do-over on, you might approach it differently today?
Yeah, I love this question. And it cuts to the edge of, I think throughout my life, I have grappled with regret. Like regret has been something that has plagued me. And I'm learning over the years not to wallow in regret. And yet still to be able to acknowledge, oh yeah, I wish if I had made this choice or done that. So it's sort of like not beating myself up over it. But still able to acknowledge it. So I'm going to try to hold this in the acknowledging it space and not in the beating myself up with regret energy. So in 2018 and 2019, I worked as the director of workplace transformation for the state of Washington. They created this position for me in the governor's office where my job was to bring this message of more love and less fear to state government workplaces across the state of Washington. And I had an amazing experience and opportunity I think I spoke, to give you context, I spoke 100 times in 2019 about love and fear, mostly in state government workplaces all over. And so I was, on a roll. And then in my private life, I would also I was doing a lot of traveling and speaking and teaching. And I came back from a trip when I took some time off, and I was in 5 countries in 3 weeks, and speaking and sharing on love. And I came back, and I just had this gut instinct, and this was in like November of 2019. This gut sense of it's time to go. It's time to leave the governor's office and go into private work. And so I gave notice in December of 2019, and I set March 2nd of 2020 as my last day of work. And and I live in the Puget Sound area in Washington State near Seattle, where the pandemic hit early, and in the United States. And within, a week or so of that decision, it was clear I wasn't going anywhere, right? I was going to stay home. And so none of that I've just mentioned do I regret. Like, I don't regret that decision. But what happened next, I would revisit. So I had been leading communities in different cities, in Seattle and Olympia, and fostering communities in San Diego and Copenhagen and a couple other places, and leading gatherings of a human workplace and of exploring love and fear in these community gatherings. And I thought that that's what I was going to do. Then when the pandemic hit, we sort of immediately pivoted, as everyone did, but began to pour energy and time into hosting virtual online gatherings of communities of people we'd already been connected with, and then others, to just process what was happening and to bring love and care to people in that moment. And I don't regret that either. But the thing that I do regret is that in the building up of that and the gathering, it ended up being like 40 affiliate people, and tending to all of that, I didn't get to write my book. I didn't write. In that time when I look back now and think, why did I not write? I was sequestered. There was, why did I not write? Because I have all the material, all of the content, and it would have been an ideal time, but I didn't. And so I reflect on that, like what was going on there? And some of it was this: should you find a publisher? Should you self-publish? And this like trying to come to the perfect decision about that, the right decision, right in air quotes. And looking back, I should have just gone for it. I had all the time in the world and could have managed all of that differently. I wish I had balanced that out better and written the book then. I'm in the process of doing it now. There's more to it now. Like time has moved on. There's new things to share and say, new insights and so on. And so that is what it is. But kind of underneath all of that is perfectionism and trying to, be the perfect gatherer, the perfect leader, taking care of this virtual community, and holding too much perfectionism around the writing. So more boldness, more diving in, more just doing it, doggone it, because it needs to be done.
You give talks, you run workshops, you also have your own podcasts that you host and then talk at. Like, in that context where you're constantly sharing your perspectives, getting feedback, and then doing this work, why is the book that important that you feel like I would go change that? Like there's something else that the book is clearly in your mind that is adding some value, that these other outlets where you are sharing your perspective, engaging, and I would even say customizing even more than a book would possibly do, is doing. So why is the book decision so important for you?
It's such an interesting question. So I love to write. Writing is where I make sense of things, and it's where I clarify. And so I think part of it is for sort of my own bringing to clarity, so that the other pieces, the other expressions are come to life more richly. There is a certain way in which, when you're a speaker, or a consultant, that particularly as a keynote speaker, which I love to do, I love to be with audiences, and I love to engage people in this conversation and see the lights go on for folks, and the release that comes when people realize, oh, my humanity and my human nature to love and care for people is the thing that's needed. I love that. And so people expect that if you're a keynote speaker, oh, where is your book? And so it's a helpful thing to have. And I think it will extend the work. But I think there's a piece of legacy there too. I'm old school. Like I said, I just turned 60, and my day we wrote books. And so, it's a thing that is important to me. I will say, through the Center for a Loving Workplace, we're also launching an AI tool that will bring thought leadership forward through that tool to people, and expand the impacts and knowledge reach in a different way. So not totally old school and limited to that, but it's just an important element to me.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely heard it's a long form expression. Like when you're talking, you can also go like, my thought is getting interrupted because you're customizing in real time. Whereas it's almost like tweet versus a whole season of a show that you're trying to think through, or shorts that you're doing. And they're very different, related, very different. And for you, it's even a part of discovery, understanding, and maybe even catharsis. You didn't bring that, but it's probably there.
There's so much, I mean, over it's been a decade now, right? So there's a lot. I have a lot, I have a lot stored up, if you will. And you can only, in any one talk or any one workshop or series of engagements, you can only bring and give so much. And people have a lot of questions, and they're legitimate. And I have things to share that help answer those questions. And I hope pave the way for people to embrace and relax into, and normalize love. I want to normalize love.
Oh, that's a great way to end the segment. Yeah. So our next segment is called Vision Venture. What is the horizon for you, and what is on the horizon for you or a human workplace? And what do you want to share with us on how you're approaching that in Vision Venture?
I had a really fantastic conversation with my friend, Dr. Apollo Amika, right around my birthday. I was engaging in a new coaching process with him that he was previewing, and it was amazing. And in that process, he knows me well, and he asked me a question that I was really struggling to answer, which was this vision question. And I was struggling at that point. And you could kind of hold up the mirror and say, what are you talking about? Like, wait a second, where are you in there? And that reflection back helped me to kind of push through and say, okay, here's what it is. Here's the vision. I want to tip the planet from fear to love by 2035 so that when I turn 70, I want to say that me and the other people that I work with and, this network of people, this growing network of people all over the world who are standing for love and against fear have succeeded in tipping the planet back in the direction of love. So that's my big vision, to contribute to that and to help that happen and to support and encourage all kinds of other people who are doing that in many different ways right now. I think we are desperate as a planet to have that happen. We desperately need that. And it seems audacious and it seems maybe goofy to some people. But, the planet's got to be tipped towards something, and it might as well be toward goodness and humanity and love and care for each other instead of harm and destruction and cruelty and meanness. We're long overdue. And so that's the big vision.
Brilliant. The tipping point for love, care, and connection.
Yes.
I think it sets up our next segment really well. So next segment is called Puzzle Point. So when we're talking about a 10-year tipping point for love, but you're starting now, if you're going there in this context where the word deny anything that it means, including inclusion, shall not be ever used. Like it literally struck down. If that's coming in, you're not going to get a grant. Like that's the environment that we're in. How are you taking us from here to there? How are you approaching this puzzle that all of us are in? How do we look at this, especially from the public sector, which is your background, but then this is your vision? How do we unravel this? Can you talk us through this puzzle point?
Yeah, it is a puzzle point, and I'm not saying that I have all the answers. I do, though, think that when I think about sort of the tide, we live in an area where the tide goes in and out twice a day. When I lived on the water for a while and, when you watch wave, even just wave action, forget about the tide, just wave action, the surf, right, will ebb out and then, rush back in. And so there's this ebb and flow, this back and forth. And sometimes it can go way out. I mean, way, 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 way out and seem like it's disappearing, but that's not where it's going to stop, right? It does come back in. And so this is in my opinion, a very traumatic, difficult, damaging time. I think there's a lot of harm being done to people and systems. There's definitely some remaking that needs to happen. But I am not a person that believes that remaking needs to be cruel. This remaking needs to be dehumanizing. Again, there's always a swinging back and forth, but this is something else that is destructive, in my opinion. And I think a lot of other people are coming to realize and believe that this is destruction as well, and that there will be a response to that. This isn't the end of the story. And so it is a difficult, painful, harmful chapter, but I'm all about planting seeds and beyond planting seeds, cultivating, creating momentum for the response that is needed. And so when I think about what is needed to fulfill that vision in 2035, Paulo and I actually talked about in the structure of thinking that he provided, what are the prerequisites that would help this to be true? Like what needs to be in place? I think people have to be dissatisfied with fear. People have to have some kind of a vision for love and for a better future. They have to have hope that there can be something different. People need to know the steps to take to go from fundamentally living in a space of fear to shifting to a space of love and care and humanity. I think that leaders who believe in more humanity and love and care for people have to be clear and bold and brave in speaking out. Part of this is, people grasping the negative impacts and harms that fear brings and the clear benefits, the neurophysiological reality of what love and safety bring. There's things like that. Like there's an education and a grasping and an understanding and people coming to realize, no, I don't like this. I want something else and something else is possible. And I see that there's a path to something else. And then it's about normalizing that. I think on the other side of the curve, that's a model that Apollo and I worked on, are some of the things that would guarantee or would up the odds, right? That this would happen. And one is that people need to realize deeply that we're all connected. The sense that you're separate from me and that we're all separate and somehow this individual view of the world and this disconnection that we delude ourselves with, particularly in the West. It's not true everywhere, but in the West, it's much more common. That is not helpful, right? And so coming to fundamentally realize, oh, we're all connected to each other and to all living beings, and like we're one system and interconnected, grasping that and that reality, like if we grasp that, then it's much easier then to live and care for each other. I think people having safety and security and education, having needs met. I'm really interested in donut economics, and this idea of living within the donut, sort of not living outside our means and making sure that needs of people and society are fulfilled and that we live inside that donut of that sweet spot, if you will, would help us to reach this goal in 10 years. Yeah, so those are a few examples. I could go on, but I'm curious what you're thinking.
I approach it, and as you do as well, like from a systems perspective. There is the education and debates and activism style getting support. And then there is also the systems that are already in place, and systems are much harder to change. However, it's easier to understand the systems. And if we can leverage the systems and then leverage the systems for driving the change, and that is how I'm just saying, like, how might we use existing systems and then leverage that for change? And one of the big systems that it's very hard to remove would be capitalism. There is a fundamental way that capitalism runs and drives so many decisions. Like, the market's down, something else happens, well, we'll change policy because the markets cannot be down for that long. Like, it's so powerful. So are there means in which those communities, and when I say that could be organizations, and we leverage those systems in play to go there? And I think you're already there. Like, you're talking to leadership who are in organizations. And when you're bringing in, and I'm going back to our first segment, like, you're bringing love into the organizations. And if that happens and they embrace it, I think your 2035 might happen, but it's not just as a activism sharpening tool. It's the organizations have already gotten built in. And when they are looking outwards and realize, like, wait, how is the world different? We are better in our organizations. And then that comes in together. So the systems that helps other systems and then activate, that feels like a faster way for a tipping point, because that's another language you use and you want it scale. Like, at a certain point, it tips, which means you need to build the systems to get there. And I'm speaking totally like an engineer, but that's what was in my mind as he was talking about this.
Sometimes people will say, and I think this gets at the heart of what you're talking about. Sometimes people will ask, is it really possible? Like, can we love people and like succeed in our organization? Or like, it's this trade-off sense. How are we going to do this and that? Is it possible to do both these things? And like, it's the wrong question. It's the wrong frame. I'm not saying throw out the system is what it is. And I'm not deluded to think that in the next 10 years that capitalism is going to go away. But rather, we can shift thinking to see that the better question is, how on earth are we going to succeed in what we're doing if we don't care for each other? If we don't love people, how are we going to, do anything in our organizations? Like, they fall apart. They don't work. People leave. People withhold. People don't bring their best. People, let errors go by, unsolved. People don't name the problem or the issue. Like, we don't do well when people are scared. Organizations do not succeed as well when people are afraid. And so the shift in thinking of that love is somehow incompatible with organizational success is like all wrong, right? It is essential. It is the thing that makes us succeed. And the nuance of this is that, like, one would hope that we want to take care of people because it's the frickin' right thing to do, right? Because we're humans on this earth living these lives. And yeah, we need rest and we need to pause and we need to have appreciation, and not because it's going to like be a lever that's going to help us produce a little bit more. Good news, it will, but just because it's the right thing to do. So there's some balance or dichotomy in here and all of that both things are true though, and they're interdependent. And so part of what I hope that as we begin to like realize and get this message forward and people begin to experience this is that fear-based leadership just won't be tolerated because it is not helpful in achieving goals. We should be coaching out fear-based leaders, not elevating them up because they are not getting us good results. And so it's a redefining of the norms and of the what's expected and tolerated because, man, we have big problems to solve. We've got hungry people and sickness and war and climate crises and we need people to like bring it and to bring all that creativity and their insights and their best problem solving. And our best problem solving doesn't happen when people are scared. It happens when people feel safe and able to come together and trust each other. And I mean, that comes out of my research again. The teams that perform the best are the ones that have each other's backs, that have acceptance and belonging and care for each other, and they just like soar. That's what we need. And we need to not tolerate anything else anymore.
Awesome. I think this has been one of the deepest or even complex puzzle points in this season for sure. So thank you for that. And our last segment is Game Break. So it's this or that Renee Smith edition. Okay, first one. Courage or compassion?
Compassion. And I choose compassion because an expression of compassion, that's courage. So
Listening or speaking?
listening.
Change agent or community builder?
Community builder.
Clarity or curiosity?
I'm going to go with clarity. Clarity is kindness, is the famous saying. And I think having clarity creates the safety for people to have curiosity. I like them all. I like all these words. You have to understand. I'll play along. Keep going.
Well, I'll give a shout out to Sneh Shah, who built all of this. And then one of our big things is to have our guests really think about both and then go like, I like both. This is hard. Success. Great. Last one for this segment. Legacy or immediacy?
Legacy.
So, Renee, thank you for your insight, care, and everything that you shared with us today, and for getting hopefully a good portion of our listeners on your 2035 vision, because you would need as many people as you'd want for that. So, thank you for joining us on the Stories and Wisdom podcast. For listeners who want to learn more, where can they find your work or join the human workplace community?
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Renee Smith A Human Workplace. Love to connect on there. Our website, the business is ahumanworkplace.com. And then the Center for a Loving Workplace, so lovingworkplace.org, is probably the most direct way to begin to be involved in the projects that we're bringing forward to engage folks. So lots of opportunity there. And I guess the other place, so many places, reneesmithspeaks.com is where if people are looking for speaking and engagement around this topic, always happy, thrilled to be with groups and to engage and talk about love, not fear.
Fantastic. So your work definitely in this podcast and in our interactions before, challenges us to like lead from a deeper place. That's something that I know it's very core to what you do. Something like deep rooted in trust, humanity, connection. Thank you for reminding us that love is not a distraction from results. It's aligned. So that was a big thing. And it's the path to even more meaningful results than just the results we might think about. So thank you once again for being on the Stories and Wisdom podcast, Renee.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And to everybody else listening, we'll be back soon with more stories, more questions, and more wisdom.
Playfulness and curiosity.
This new superpower called
They're
persuasion.
the rules of the world, and then here's the rules for us.
Real deep pink.
That was a very different level of inequity.
What does rich mean?
Stories and wisdom.